Coming up on Hands on Mac, let's take a look at network sharing on macOS. Stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Welcome back to Hands on Mac. I am Mikah Sargent, and today we are going to take a look at a very special section of the Settings app on macOS. This is the section that is all about network sharing options. These are just simply called sharing settings by Apple. And these are the settings that give you the ability to do different types of network shares of different categories. So without further ado, let's head over to macOS and take a look. All right, here we are on macOS, and we're going to launch the System Settings app. And the first thing we need to do is choose General, and then we will find the sharing option. It is in the final group above Time Machine. When we choose sharing, we are presented with a list of different options in different categories. We've got content and media, we've got accessories and internet, and then we've got advanced. The first thing that I want you to see is actually something at the very bottom of the list. It's called local host name. And this is the name of your Mac on your local network. This is important because this is what different Macs on the network are going to use to be able to connect to this Mac should you choose to make something available. Now, most of you, when you launch this screen, are going to see screen sharing turned on by default. And that is because Apple makes that possible by default for many different devices, because you have the ability in FaceTime and in some other places, which I've shown before, to share your screen. We've also talked about it in the past on an episode of Hands on Mac. Now, in this sharing section, we're just going to go down the list. The first option here is file sharing, and this lets you make available a specific file or folder to other Macs on your network. Now, what's important to understand is that when this feature is turned on, you have some options. You can specifically choose a file, or you can choose to make your full disk available. The toggle, of course, is what turns it on and off, but in order to make changes, we're going to choose the eye icon, which will bring up the different file sharing options. Now, up at the top is how you toggle on file sharing. Below, you'll see allow full disk access for all users. That means that anyone who has a login on this Mac is able to access the full disk on this Mac. The users are listed on the right, including me, the staff, as it's called, and everyone. Staff and everyone have read-only access. You can choose to not give them any access. If you'd like, well, read-only access, of course, means they're able to view. Read and write means that they can make changes and write something to it. Or write-only, which is just a Dropbox, which essentially means you can paste folders to somewhere or paste files to somewhere, but that's the extent of it. Now, with this, we have some different options. We can add a specific user. So in this case, we might want to add the guest user, Mikah TWiT. You can add specific contacts as well, if you have those. And if you've got a contact list, you can also add those. You can also choose which folders are shared. On the left, you'll see shared folders. These are the folders that are shared by default. Public folders. These folders are automatically created within the user folder, and they are called the public folder because they are meant to be shared as actual folders as part of the file sharing setting. What you can do is add other folders if you'd like. So if there's a folder that you have in, say, your documents, for example, you can choose that folder. Maybe I would want to make the example folder available to other people. Now that's accessible, and you can see that Mikah TWiT has read and write access. Everyone else has read-only access. And then there's a little options icon or button down at the bottom. If we choose that, that has some special settings. The SMB file sharing options, which means that you use SMB to actually, this is a file sharing protocol, so it's a little bit complicated. And then you can see who is connected via SMB, and then also the ability to turn on Windows file sharing. This is a special kind of access, and it is frankly less secure. So what you want to do is as much as you possibly can, you don't want to have Windows file sharing turned on unless the Windows machine that you're using to try to access this Mac doesn't give you the ability for some reason to access the Mac. So only go into Windows file sharing and turn that on for a specific account if you are having trouble gaining access to this Mac from a Windows machine. Now, pro tip, there's a little secret when it comes to these shared folders. If you take your finger and you put it on the control option and then click on one of these files or folders, you do have some more options, including show in Finder. So it'll show you where it exists on your local Mac. Apply permissions to enclosed items. So you can say within this folder, I want to make sure that there are permissions for each of the things inside. You can also choose get info, which will give you the information about it when it's stored in Finder. But lastly, there's an advanced options option. Now, what this does is it says, I'm okay with guest users. There are 4 different options here. Toggled on is allow guest users, meaning I'm okay with guest users being able to access this. To only allow SMB encrypted connections. So using SMB, that needs to be encrypted in order to connect to that folder. You can also choose to share it as a time machine backup destination. That means you're telling macOS, I want this to be a place where somebody can do a time machine backup. So maybe you have a Mac that is kind of always plugged in, always on. My Mac Studio is a great example of this. And it's got a lot of storage space. I want that Mac to serve as a time machine backup for other stuff on my network. I can say, make this a time machine backup destination. Then my MacBook Air, which I have in front of me, is able to connect to that and is able to use it as a time machine backup destination. And then you can limit those backups. You can say, I'm okay with it doing that, but I don't ever want it to take up more than 500 gigabytes of storage space. So you can toggle that on as well. That is file sharing. So I am actually going to remove that example folder that I added and keep it as is default. The next is media sharing. And once again, we're going to choose the I so you can understand what this is. This is for sharing your personal media library. This is, in many cases, what was once known as kind of iTunes media sharing. So we have my library. I've got it currently turned off, but it has the ability to set up a home sharing option, which means that any device that is signed into an Apple ID is able to access this Mac's media library so long as that device is logged in and is on the same Wi-Fi or Ethernet network as the device that has the library on it. So you can also use it to share photos with the Apple TV and then also update play counts. So if you're listening to music and you want that whatever device is connected to be able to access it, it can do that as well. And then lastly, you have the option to share media with guests. So whether or not you require a password and what exactly is available to guests. You can see that rentals is turned off because you may not want one of your guests who's accessing the network who can see your media library. You may not want them to start a rental given that you only have 24 hours to watch it after that. Now, currently the indicator light, so to speak, it is a virtual indicator light, is gray, meaning that media sharing is turned off. It will be green if media sharing is turned on, and it will appear as another color, I believe yellow, if you are having an issue with media sharing, and then you can go in and kind of make those corrections. The next option is screen sharing, which I've talked a lot about in previous episodes. Once this is on, then other people can access the computer's screen by going to a specific address or by looking for Evelina, which is the name of this MacBook Air, in their sidebar on Finder. I have the option to either say, yes, anyone may request permission to control the screen, whether they need a password to do so, and then who all has access. You can, of course, add and remove access for different people to use screen sharing. So hitting the plus icon obviously gives you the ability to add more. Hitting the minus icon means that those people don't have access, and you can choose to allow all users to gain access or only the ones that you specify. The next section is called content caching. And content caching is handy if you have a lot of different devices that regularly need updates, because what content caching does is it stores some of your information locally, particularly software updates and applications, that kind of thing. Those get stored locally on the Mac, and then the other Macs and Apple devices on the network can sort of look to that device as the place to pull a software update. So, for example, maybe you download the software update to your Mac Studio, and instead of having to re-download it on your MacBook Air when you go to update, the MacBook Air can look on the local network, see that the Mac Studio has already downloaded that, and pull from there. This was much more helpful in a time where we didn't have as much bandwidth as many of us have these days and as much data as many of us have these days, but it may still be helpful for you depending on your personal internet connection and if you have a cap on the amount of data you can download. We'll tap that I button and you can see content caching is currently turned off. You have the option to choose what is cached. So all content, only shared content, or only iCloud content. So with shared content, it will cache the stuff that you have that is shared across different devices. And with iCloud content, that of course can include things that you download to your desktop or photos or what have you. Then your kind of secondary and tertiary devices will look to that main device as the means of grabbing that content. And then you also have the option from here to share your internet connection. We're going to look at something that's a little bit more involved in a minute, but this is one way to turn on internet connection sharing. And it basically says that when an iOS device is connected over USB, use this device's internet connection and pull the cached content to basically move to that iOS device. There's also an options here, which lets you choose how big the cache size is allowed to be. So you may want to set it to a lower value, for example, so that it doesn't take up a whole bunch of space. And then you can turn on content caching from there. The next section or category is called accessories and internet. And the first option is Bluetooth sharing. Bluetooth sharing, of course, gives you the ability to use Bluetooth to share files. We'll click on the I, and right now Bluetooth sharing is turned off. But here are some options. So when you're receiving items from something that is trying to share over Bluetooth, you have the option of what you want to do. Accept and save the file, accept and open the file, ask what to do, or never allow. I'm going to choose ask what to do. And of course, I don't have Bluetooth sharing turned on, so I can't do this in the first place. But if I have a device, particularly Android phones or a Windows machine, they both have Bluetooth sharing options. And I had this turned on, that device would be able to share. And then where it goes is into the downloads folder. That's the choice there that I have made. When other devices look at my computer over Bluetooth to browse my computer for files over Bluetooth, I choose ask what to do, in which case I can say, yes, I'm allowing that. No, I'm not. Those devices can then connect and they will look into the public folder. You can choose whichever folder you want here. The Bluetooth settings option down at the bottom is just for your standard Bluetooth settings. So we'll choose done here. Next is printer sharing. And what this does is it gives your printer that is connected to that specific Mac the ability to make itself available to other devices on the network. Or I should say, other devices on the network are able to access the printer that is connected to this specific Mac. So I have two network printers. But if for some reason there was a device on my network that was not able to see the printer that is just on my network as a whole, I could technically turn on printer sharing, select one of these printers, and I would be able to then share that printer over the network. You can select them to turn on printer sharing after you've toggled it on as a whole, and then you can choose what users have access to those printers. They either can print or they have no access. The printers and scanners settings option at the bottom is just the standard printers and scanners setting option, so we're not going to show that. Next is internet sharing. Now, before you'll remember that I said that was one of the features in content caching. Internet sharing as a whole is a lot more complicated. Of course, you've got the main toggle that lets you turn on internet sharing. And then after that, you have a choice. So This is typically going to be for a device that is plugged in via Ethernet, for example. So the Mac Studio that I have has an Ethernet connection. You would share your connection from, and in this case, I would choose Thunderbolt Ethernet. And then what I am allowing is to devices that are using something specific. So maybe I want to basically turn my Mac into a Wi-Fi router. That's something that you can actually do. You say, share your connection from Ethernet to devices that are using Wi-Fi. And then that will give the ability for you to connect directly to your Mac and use that connection that exists on your Mac. You can also use iPhone USB. So in that case, it will actually let you connect over USB to provide an internet connection to the phone. And then there are a bunch of other different Ethernet adapters that have popped up over time as part of your network settings. So those are able to be used as well. You simply toggle them on after you've turned on internet sharing, and those different places will be able to share your internet connection from your Mac. Again, not necessarily important in our modern world of devices that all have fast connections, but maybe there is a time where your Wi-Fi on your iPhone, if you've got kind of an older router, for example, isn't as fast as if you were using Ethernet from your Mac, and the USB connection is good enough, especially on a modern iPhone, to be able to get a better connection. Then the last section is advanced. And for this, it is truly advanced. So the first section is called remote management, and remote management gives people the ability to access your Mac using what's called Apple Remote Desktop. Apple Remote Desktop is separate from simple screen sharing, and it is a tool for kind of pros to control your Mac from another location. So with this, remote management is set up. It is not something that I'm going to get into too much detail about because, again, this is for people who are kind of getting more advanced than just being able to do screen sharing, which also allows for some control of the device. But essentially turning this on, of course, turns on remote management. Then a person on the other end is able to use Apple Remote Desktop to access this Mac. You can either toggle on or toggle off whether remote management status appears in the menu bar, so somebody's kind of aware of it, whether anyone is able to request permission to control the screen, and then if they have to use a password in order to control the screen, which is something that I recommend having turned on. The options allow you to choose what users are able to do when they use Apple Remote Desktop. If they can observe, control, generate reports, open and quit applications, change settings, delete and replace items, start text chat, send messages, or start and shut down, or copy items. All of those options are able to be toggled on and off independently, which is a really great thing to be able to have entire complete control. The next option is called remote login, and this is for people who use SSH. So if you are a terminal person, then you are very familiar with SSH. It's essentially access to the device over SSH in the terminal to kind of do things behind the scenes. I'm not going to get more in depth than that because it is a complicated thing that some of us power users do use regularly, but if you want more about that, you can watch an early episode of Hands on Mac from Leo Laporte, where he talks about using the terminal. I'll go ahead and choose the I just so you can see remote login is currently turned off. You can toggle that on, and then whether or not someone has full disk access when they use SSH to access this machine, and then who gets to use the machine. You can choose only specific users or all users, and then of course add or subtract who has access. The last option here is remote application scripting. And this gives another Mac the ability to send commands to your Mac. So an example of this is AppleScript from another machine can open a document and print it from the machine that you're connecting to. So I currently have this turned off. Again, this is only allowed for people who are administrators. You can choose to allow all users or just those users. All of this is local area network stuff, of course, with that login. And so you are able to gain access to the machine, perhaps wake it up, have it open up a document, and then print that document if your Mac doesn't have that ability. Basically, any kind of scripting can be done from another device. Lastly, as I mentioned, the local host name of the device. If at any time you want to change that local host name, you simply click the edit button, which appears below the local host name section, and that lets you choose a new name for your machine on this local area network. Folks, that is a rundown of the entirety of the sharing menu on the Mac. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or more, please send those my way, Mikah@twit.tv. I appreciate you for tuning in. Thanks so much for your time, and I will catch you again next week for another episode of Hands on Mac. Bye-bye.